All my friends, good evening, all of you, and welcome to this 30th Kovinar being conducted by the government of Andhra Pradesh, which is a flagship program of government of Andhra Pradesh in the capacity building of all the doctors working in the various sectors. And as you are all aware, that this is a very important milestone in conducting the various Kovinars for the last over almost an year. Every week or more than once in a week, we have been trying hard to empower all the doctors who are working at various stages with the latest knowledge with regards to the COVID-19. As you are all aware, now that we are involved with the management of mucormycosis, as the cases are rising, the government felt it is appropriate to conduct these webinars continuously in order to empower all of our doctors with the knowledge. I am very glad and I am very thankful to Dr. Vinod Kumar, IAS, for having reposed so much of confidence in Andhra Medical College to conduct this particular program. And over, we have been discussing about this mucormycosis. You all must be wondering as to why we discuss this particular subject over and over. So it is important for every one of us to understand in detail as to what is happening around and what are the protocols, what are the latest guidelines that are available with us. You are aware that the government is issuing the COVID instant orders from time to time in order to guide us as to how to deal with these cases. And today being the 30th AP Kovinar, and I am very happy to share the stage with two other important colleagues. One is Dr. Ravi Shekhar, who is a professor of oral and maxillofacial surgery, and another colleague, Dr. Shweta, from All India Institute of Medical Sciences. I will be introducing them as and when they speak. First, to set the ball rolling, I shall be speaking and giving you an overview of the surgical management of the mucormycosis, followed by the role of the orthodontic surgeon or the facial-maxillary surgeon in the treatment of mucormycosis by Dr. Ravi Shekhar, and after that, the ophthalmologist viewpoint by Dr. Sweta. So, as you are all aware, now that we have 1500 cases in the Andhra Pradesh as of yesterday, and of these 1500 cases, about 1256 cases have already are under treatment, and nearly 200 cases have already been discharged. They have been cured and sent home. So it's very important to share some of the statistics with you all, particularly as to how we are facing this problem. So it is important for us to understand the relationship between the COVID-19 and the mucormycosis, because this is a very unprecedented aspect that we have seen over a period of time, and I feel that it is very essential for us to understand the epidemiology of this particular disease as well. So amongst the 1500 patients that we have been dealing with, we have almost 2/3 of the individuals belong to middle and the old age groups, and about 1/3 of them belong to the younger age groups of less than about 40 years. Similarly, we have observed that about 50% of the individuals are suffering from the rhinocerebral mucormycosis, and about 10% with the pulmonary, another 10% with the cutaneous lesions, and surprisingly, about 30% of them are having very uncommon presentations. Very minimal are having the disseminated disease. And there is one more observation that has been made with regards to these 1500 cases are about 90% of these cases have the history of COVID-19. That means they have suffered from the COVID-19 in the past, and now they have developed the mucormycosis. 90% of them. So that's the very reason why we should understand as to what is the relationship between the COVID-19 and this particular disease. Earlier we know that we have a lot of other risk factors. Now the COVID-19 has become a risk factor, and we have to do a lot of investigations to find out as to what the relationship is in order to prevent them. And we have about 10% of the cases who are non-COVID. So in this particular epidemic, we have about 10% of the patients to be more precise, 139 patients who did not have the COVID, but still they have the mucormycosis. And there have been a lot of attributes. One is towards the steroid therapy. People said that it is because of the indiscriminate usage of steroids that most of the people are suffering, and steroids being used as a part of the treatment of COVID-19. However, you'll be surprised to note that about only half of the patients whom we have seen so far have received the steroids during their COVID-19. Rest half did not receive. So that basically makes a point that steroids alone may not be the reason for this particular mucormycosis. Similarly, there were a lot of attributes towards usage of oxygen, and the oxygen delivery system, the various systems that are used have been incriminated in the causation of the mucormycosis. But you will be surprised to know that only 1/3 of the total patients of COVID-19 have received the oxygen, but they are suffering from mucormycosis. In other words, the patients whom we are seeing, if you take a history, only 1/3 of them have really received the oxygen when they were suffering from COVID-19. 2/3 of them have not received. So that refutes the argument that the oxygen delivery system is basically the maybe primarily responsible for mucormycosis. Similarly, we have seen some other risk factors as well. The diabetes being present in about 60% of the cases, and some 20% of the patients had immunocompromised status, and about 10% had comorbidities. So, and what is quite phenomenal in this is, as we have seen the literature, there is a male preponderance. In this particular study also, the epidemiological study that we have done, about 2/3 of the patients are men and only 1/3 of the patients are women. So that's how usually it goes. So with this background, I feel that we all need to understand a little bit of surgical management, and I'll try to explain the various modalities. Then you all must be wondering as to why I am here today. That is, being a plastic surgeon, which is the head of the department of plastic surgery. We deal with mucormycosis as well, in the sense that the plastic surgeon, as you know, deals with the head to toe whenever there is a deformity, deficiency, or whenever there is an ailment, a reconstructive option that is required. So from head to toe and from womb to tomb, the plastic surgeon comes into picture, and with the aesthetics of the face being better understood by the plastic surgeons, most of the times people feel it is appropriate that the plastic surgeon deals with the case or helps in dealing with the case when others are taking care of this particular patient. So with that introduction, let me go and next slide. Let me go and explain as to what the mucormycosis is and how we go about it. And you know that mucormycosis is a fungal infection. Yeah, somebody by name Honor 7C is controlling my screen. Please do not share your screen as long as I am sharing my screen. Yeah. So you know that it is a fungal infection. It is caused by the 3 genera of the order Mucorales. So the primary fungal infections in this are rhizopas, rhizomucor and mucor. You will know that the spores are present throughout the nature. So it is ubiquitous in nature. We all have them on our body, particularly in our nostrils, as well as in the sand, in the compost, in the air, everywhere. And it is mainly acquired by the inhalation. But also it has been observed that the debrided skin also can attract these spores and lead to the infection. And it causes the life-threatening infection in certain immunocompromised patients. That's the reason why people have thought that the individuals who have used the steroids are more prone for this particular infection. Though it is one of the contributory factors, but it is not the factor alone that's going to cause this mucormycosis. So, if you understand the pathophysiology, it is the invasion of this particular fungus which causes the invasion and later causes the destruction of the tissues that results in the necrosis and leading to the requirement of surgical intervention. It is the angio invasion as well as the thrombosis which causes the damage to the tissues, causing the tissue necrosis. And if we understand the major risk factors, one minute, forward, yes, yeah. The major risk factors, as you all are aware, that it is uncontrolled diabetes and the immunosuppression as a result of the cancer treatment. Some of the cancer drugs will cause the immunosuppression, and people who are using the immunosuppressants following the organ transplant like the kidney transplant or the liver transplant, and some people will have the immunocompromised states like people who have been suffering from the HIV infections, the malnutrition, and burns victims with extensive raw areas with malnutrition and other immunocompromised state as a result of the burns, and sometimes rare infections in the immunocompetent host also. Some of the rare infections also attract this particular disease. So of these many manifestations that we have, it is the rhino-orbital cerebral disease is the most common. So it is the nose, the orbits and the brain which gets commonly affected. So what are the signs and symptoms that the patient comes with usually? So patient comes with unilateral facial pain to start with, and headache, fever, and they'll have the nasal congestion or nasal stuffiness to start with, and later it leads to the nasal bleeding also along with the discharge, and people may have the ophthalmoplegia. They'll have the drooping of the eyelid, and over a period of time they will not be able to move the eye. They can have the double vision, they can have the proptosis which can be seen by us. Visual defects will be there and slowly progressing on to the blindness. So there will be multiple cranial nerve palsies also are associated with this, and patients ultimately go to the state of confusion with the moment it enters the brain and leading to stroke and death. So how do we diagnose this patient? So the moment we have any of these risk factors and the patient tells us that he has suffered from COVID about a month or so back, then you should have a high index of suspicion, particularly when somebody comes with facial swelling, unilateral facial swelling. So we all have to have a high index of suspicion, particularly when the patient has poor control of the diabetes mellitus, when they are on the other drugs, when they are continuing with the steroids. And you look at the classical symptoms that I have just told you, and then we can do two investigations, either a CT scan or an MRI. MRI brain or MRI facial bones will be a better option. MRI face or MRI brain. CT scan of the paranasal sinuses with contrast causes the opacification, and bony and cartilage destruction can easily be seen along with the proptosis compared to the opposite eye. And The MRI brain is the investigation of choice, and this gives us an idea of the orbital inflammation that is taking place as well as the involvement of the brain in these cases, and it also throws light on the involvement of the cavernous sinus. So here you can see the CT scan of the facial bones, wherein you can see the extensive destruction, filling of the orbital floor is destroyed here compared to the other side. The entire maxillary antrum is filled with the necrotic tissue. You can see the destruction of the lateral wall of the nose as well. And if you see the MRI, you can see the involvement of the apical region of the eye here, and the involvement of the cavernous sinus as well. And the real clinching of the diagnosis is by tissue biopsy. However, fungal staining with the KOH can throw some light, though the sensitivity is not that very high. Fungal cultures take few days to come back, but reasonably a good one. However, the main stay of diagnosis will always be biopsy. Biopsy either by frozen section or by regular paraffin mounting will give us an idea. So what will it basically show us? It shows non-septate hyphae with about 90-degree branching. So there is no septate in between. You can see the long ribbon-like hyphae which is diagnostic of this particular fungal infection. So here it clearly tells us the rhizopus, what we are talking about, the mucorale group. Here you can see long ribbon-like the hyphae, but on the contrast you can see the other fungus, the aspergillus, where you have these septae. These are all the multiple septae you can see. So this is how the mucor differentiates itself from the aspergillus. Basically, if you go to the treatment is basically to control the aggressively control the underlying condition. That means medically you have to see that the fungus is taken care of. So what do we do for that? Systemic infusion of the antifungal medication, which is the mainstay in the treatment along with the surgery. The second one is extensive surgical debridement of all the necrotic and obviously infected tissue. All that has to be removed. Unless that is removed and covered with the antifungal medication, it's very difficult to achieve the optimum result. So what is the antifungal medication that we have? Though it becomes a repetition of what I am saying, like I have told you in the beginning, it's very important for us to recapitulate as to what we are supposed to do every time. We know that the mainstay of antifungal medication is in the form of liposomal amphotericin B, which is infused at 5 milligrams per kg body weight intravenously daily for about 2 weeks. That will be followed by the posaconazole, about 400 milligrams orally twice a day for about 12 to 16 weeks. And an adjuvant intranasal aerosolized amphotericin B has also been tried only as an adjuvant, but there is no definitive role of this particular medication. And in the event that the amphotericin B is not available, injection posaconazole, which is a second line drug, can always be given in the dose of 300 milligrams intravenously twice a day on the day 1, followed by about 300 milligrams once a day for about 2 weeks, followed by posaconazole tablets for 12 to 16 weeks. Isavuconazole can also be used in the place of posaconazole tablets. However, one has to understand that it is not fungicidal, it is fungistatic more often. That's the reason why a fungicidal agent is always preferred. Coming to the surgical treatment, about which we are going to talk today, the topic of discussion today. So the basic principles of surgery or the surgical debridement are, we have to have a focused removal of the necrotic tissue. So all the necrotic tissue needs to be removed. And number 2, the timing. It should be performed as soon as possible, as soon as you diagnose. The third one is, if necessary, you have to do many times. If in one stage, if you are not able to remove completely, or if you have thought that you have removed completely, but on your examination the next day or the day after, if you find more necrotic areas, you should try to go in and try to complete the debridement. So no necrotic tissue should be left behind in the face. Similarly, we have to understand that we often have to remove the neighboring structures as well. For example, orbital extension if the eye is involved, and I am sure that Dr. Swati will be talking a little later about in detail about the orbital extension and all, though I am going to show you some pictures. And similarly, if it is involving the palate, a palate also needs to be removed, known as the palatectomy. These are the additional procedures that need to be done. And one has to understand the goal of our treatment is to eradicate all the visible disease. Whatever that is visible to the naked eye has to be removed on the table. And you have to cover it with the antifungal medication in the perioperative period in order to take care of the microscopic disease. That means there may be some fungus, some hyphae that were not visible to your eye because it is not the necrotic tissue. It may be there in the surrounding normal appearing tissue. So it has to be followed by the antifungal medication. That should be our goal. And the key is to do it as soon as possible and as complete as possible. You should completely remove it and you should remove it immediately. So these are the two key features that you have to understand. So to understand the surgery proper, what we need to do, so we have to understand the anatomy. Anatomy of the nose, we have to have the detailed understanding of the anatomy of the nose, anatomy of the PNS, paranasal sinuses, the eye and the brain. That's the reason why a multidisciplinary approach is required. You need to have an ENT surgeon, an ophthalmic surgeon, and a neurosurgeon also if brain is involved, and along with a plastic surgeon, so that the surgery becomes wholesome. To give you some idea, so this has to be kept in mind very well. You should know how the nose is, where exactly this particular infection would be, how the turbinates are placed, how the meatai are placed, how does the maxillary sinus looks, the orbit. In the orbit, the two thinner areas of the orbit, the orbital floor, and the laminae pepracia, that is the medial orbital wall, which is very thin and likely to be breached because of the infection of the ethmoidal layer cells. You know, both the anterior and the posterior ethmoidal layer cells, which will be filled with the fungus. So that's when either you have to, if there is a continuum, it may infect the orbit, in which case either you have to take care of the orbit as well. So the anatomy of this particular area is very important, and in the coronal suction, if you look at, you will see how the air passes, how the turbinates are placed, and how the meatus is placed. And also you should understand the different fossae like the pterygopalatine fossa and so on and so forth, and their relationship with the hard palate here. If the floor of the nose is formed by the roof of the palate, so whenever there is the disease is extensive, it can cause the necrosis of this particular hard palate as well. And this is another picture showing the ethmoidal air cells, the maxillary sinus, and the lamina pepracia, the meridial orbital wall, and the floor. The moment this gets filled up, you know that this breaks open into the orbit. And anatomy of the eye and the cavernous sinus and the venous supply has to be understood by one and all. The reason for the cavernous sinus infection is the retrograde spread of the fungus into the cavernous sinus, because there is a confluence of the veins around the eye. If you look at this eye, you can see the extraocular muscles, the diplopia, and the more than 3 muscle involvement is an indication for surgery, as we all know. And involvement of this particular area is very common, which can be seen in the MRI, which necessitates immediate usage of the drug, as well as if it does not improve, one may have to go and do the orbital excenteration. And another view of this basically to tell us the 6 extraocular muscles over here which are involved in the movement of the globe, and this is the area which is wherein this particular fungus resides, the hyphae of them, and because of and we have to have a lot of concentration on this area when we are taking an MRI. And whenever we operate, though the surgical principles remain the same, there are two approaches. One is an external approach, the other one is an internal approach. External approach is a classical incision is given over the ethmoids, that's an area which is commonly infected, and it allows a wide access of the anterior and the posterior ethmoid sinuses, and from there, if there is an involvement of the eye also, you can, the lamina pepracia is the one which is removed by doing a medial orbitotomy, what we call, and enter the orbit and try to drain them or remove the necrotic tissue. And the advantage of this is there is a great access to the orbit whenever we give an open incision in between the middle of the nose and the medial canthus, and this can be extended to the other areas as well. You can extend it downwards as a lateral rhinotomy incision, or still further, if you have a disease still downwards up to the palate, you can convert it into a Weber-Ferguson incision as well. So the disadvantage of the open approach is it leaves a facial scar, and there is a limited access to the rest of the paranasal senses like the maxillary sinus. The other one is an internal approach which is performed endoscopically through the endoscopic equipment. The advantage is it accesses all the paranasal sinuses and it gives a magnified view, thereby allowing the complete resection, and even in the smaller spaces can easily be accessed through the endoscopic equipment. There won't be any external scar. These are the advantages. The disadvantages of the internal approach being it has to be combined with the external approach if the skin is involved. If the skin is involved, obviously you have to remove the lesion over the skin also, so that has to be combined with that. And this requires sophisticated equipment in the form of the scopes and video monitoring, which may not be available at every place, but in tertiary care hospitals they are always available. So to put it in a nutshell, whenever there is no skin extension, it is the endoscopic procedure that is preferred, and orbital excision has to be performed if it is not responsive to the systemic treatment, or if the MRI findings are suggestive of intraorbital involvement. Similarly, if skin is involved, combined endoscopic and external approach is performed often. So these are the two examples showing a similar approaches. Here you can see that the skin is already involved, so you have to have an external approach. Here you can go through the internal approach and take care of your mastoid sinus. However, the eye needs to be taken care of by orbital excision if it is involved serious enough. So this is the external approach I was talking to you about. An incision is given lateral to the medial canthus here, approaching the ethmoid cells, and if a medial orbitotomy is performed, then you can remove the necrotic tissue from the eye as well. So this is how the sophisticated equipment of NES endoscopy are. You have different kinds of scopes with varied angles, 0 angle, 30 degrees, 70 degrees and so on. And these are the different instruments that are used when performing the endoscopic sinus surgery. So this is how it looks when you put your telescope inside. You can see the necrotic tissue here, which needs to be cleaned up thoroughly. So I'll present some of our experience with about 10 cases that we had so far, of which about 4 cases wherein we have done an orbital excision, and in some of the cases we have to combine orbital excision with the external removal of the necrotic tissue. So this is a team where we have done about 10 cases so far, and the other cases are in progress today. So here is a patient, a middle-aged individual having ophthalmoplegia and having an extensive disease in the maxillary sinus as well. The ENT surgeon has performed the endoscopic sinus surgery and removing all the debris, all the necrotic tissue from inside the sinus, followed by an eyelid sparing or orbital excision has been performed. You can see here the infraorbital nerve that has been picked up. So we take that also and subject it to the biopsy. Here you can see the completed procedure. So another similar case where I am saying that it requires some cutaneous lesions also need to be taken care of. You can see the involvement of the eye, the haziness of the eye, chemosis of the eye, the extensive disease here of the cheek, and you can see even the lower lip is also involved here. So what has been done is the orbital excision of course has been done. The cutaneous lesion has been marked in order to excise all that and debride the entire tissue, and it has been planned to do this shave excision of this particular lip lesion. There is a small video I am trying to show. Okay, that is basically to show how extensive should be the skin excision along with the necrotic tissue. So here if you see how extensively that it has been done, here you can see that particular part of the skin which was marked has been excised, and you can see the continuation of that through the orbital floor into the maxillary sinus as well as pterygopalatine fossa. So it's an extensive lesion leading to this much of the tissue which is necrotic that has been removed, and you can see that the lower lip shave excision of the particular lesion has been done. And this is the post-operative picture, and intraoperatively we have done frozen section biopsy and found the ribbon-like non-septate hyphae, which is classical of this particular fungus, the mucormycosis. You can see the gauze piece passed through the orbital floor into the maxillary sinus, and such is an extensive lesion that we usually encounter in these conditions. So another lady with the ophthalmoplegia and extensive involvement of the eye, wherein the orbital excision had to be performed. Here again pointing out at the infraorbital nerve, which we separately take for the biopsy, so that we will know the involvement of the nerve as well. So you can see the MRIs, how extensive is this lesion. You can see the necrotic tissue, the destruction of the the lateral nasal wall, the medial wall of the orbit. The extensive nature of the disease can easily be made out from this. And another lady who has presented with the naso-orbital, rhino-orbital lesions, where again the endoscopic sinus surgery followed by the orbital excision have been performed, and this is how it looks at the end of the procedure. However, these people requires a lot of rehabilitation in the form of prosthetic eye. So some of the lesions which are very extensive, this is a previous case, not in this epidemic, where skin has to be removed in toto and quite extensively requires reconstructive procedures like this. The reconstruction is a very big challenge and such have huge defects. Whenever there is a large defect, either we have to use the local flap or a free flap. Local flap meaning by you take the skin and subcutaneous tissue along with its blood supply from the adjoining areas, or you have to take these tissues from far off places along with its blood supply and anastomose the vessels at the recipient area, so that you can give them a reasonably improved appearance rather than a very grotesque appearance that is seen here. So this is a big reconstructive challenge that most of the plastic surgeons face. In summary, so far we have seen that it is a very devastating disease, the mucormycosis, and the exact relationship between the COVID-19 and mucormycosis has to be established, though 90% of the cases that we see nowadays are related to the COVID-19. We have to see as to what is the reason why these people are getting affected. Is it because of the increased usage of steroids? Is it because of the reduced cell-mediated immunity that these people are suffering from? And so on and so forth. And similarly, biopsy, as I told you earlier, remains the mainstay of the diagnosis, though the KOH staining and the cultures are handy sometimes. The management principles remain constant, whether it is after COVID or because of the other reasons. And medical and surgical treatments have to go hand in hand, and one has to understand that multidisciplinary approach is the key for providing the adequate treatment to these patients. Reconstruction and rehabilitation, reconstruction following extensive removal of the tissue, and rehabilitation following the orbital excenteration by providing the prosthetic eye makes the life wholesome for these individuals. And I wish to thank you for your attention, and I shall be taking up questions once the other two presenters also complete their presentation. And now I'll be unsharing my screen, and I would request Dr. Ravi Shekhar to share his screen.
Yes, sir.
New share. I have stopped sharing the screen, and now I would request Dr. Ravi Shekhar to share his screen. And before he shares his screen, I wish to introduce him to the audience. Dr. Ravi Shekhar is an MDS, and he did his BDS from Kovempu University in Karnataka, and later from Rajiv Gandhi University he took his MDS, and he has got 17 years of teaching experience, and he has 16 publications to his credit. He gave 15 guest lectures at the national level and the state level on various aspects of the oral and maxillofacial surgery, and his interests are basically the trauma, the orthognathic surgery, infections, as well as the temporomandibular joint surgeries. Over to you, Dr. Ravi Shekhar, to make your presentation.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. And your talk was too good. It was small, sweet, and very clear for everyone regarding the basics of mucormycosis. But as we go further with the topic, I just would like to introduce my department, that is Department of Maxillofacial Surgery, is a part of dentistry. We are trained both in medical and dental aspects. And the main thing what we do in maxillofacial surgery is that we would like to treat a wide spectrum of diseases, including injuries, defects in head and neck, face, jaw, and the heart tissues of the oral maxillofacial region. The main goal of a maxillofacial surgeon is not only to finish off the case or remove the pathology, but to bring back its per normal contour and functions of the maxillofacial region, so that the patient would be having his normal life post surgeries too. So as already, sir, you have explained well with the diagrams and the spread methodology. Yes, involvement of mucormycosis is high in maxilla, mainly loading in the maxillary sinus, superiorly going to the orbit, medially coming to the paranasal sinuses, posteriorly going to the pterygoids, sphenoids, and into the base of the skull. We have come across some cases, not me as such, but some of my friends have faced even mucor in mandibular cases, which is really a questionable thing. As you said, the general signs and symptoms, the signs and symptoms of the oral cavity are changes in gingival color, contour, and texture, which I would be showing in my further presentation. Multiple abscess is also the most common thing which we are seeing. Expose of necrotic bone, again an indicator of osteomyelitis. Osteomyelitis leading to fungal diseases are coming much common now, right now, what we are facing in the maxillofacial region. Mobility of teeth and ulcerations are also seen. Coming to the surgical protocol, I made it into three phases, as you have already said in your lecture that we have to completely debride. Yes, we have to completely debride, leaving not even a pin drop of tissue over there. Maybe we have to do partial or subtotal or complete maxillectomies in phase one. We have to be aggressive. In phase two, what we have to do is after the surgery is over, with the help of the supportive drugs, that is the medical treatment still continuing in, we need to do regular dressings. And if you find any small lesions popping out again, to be debrided and cleaned then and there. So it takes multiple sittings, as you have said, sir. Maybe not under GA, but still can be managed under local when we have a good team to do the job post-operatively under local conditions. The last phase would be for reconstructions. That is, it is of two types, because in phase one and phase two, when you do an ablative surgery, you are left out with an open tissue which has to be covered for the better feed and nutrition of the patient. So we try to give temporary obturators, which I would be showing how we do it and what is the advantage of it. And facial reconstructions, as you have said, yes, it is a challenging for both maxillofacial surgeons and plastic surgeons, because there is a question down and I would be putting that question in the end. Coming to our experience and management protocols, you are seeing a lady. This lady has approached us with loss of tissues over there and necrotic bone, which is very clear that initially by clinically seeing it, we thought it is osteomyelitis, but signs, symptoms, and other things have relieved us that she's suffering with mucormycosis. And this is the case in the phase one, that is nearly, she right now is under 9 months follow-up with us. And the second figure, the exposure, we have used Webb Ferguson because we need to clear each and everything. We don't want to leave anything because the involvement of the bone is also there, which cannot be taken up by endoscopic surgery, because the debridement not only is the tissue, it is even by the removal of the necrotic mass of the bone. And this here, the debridement is completed, but there is a small bone which you can see there, that is none other but your pterygoid with a little bit of extension towards the sphenoid. We could scrape out everything over there and clear it off, but we didn't remove that because that is an entry into the base of the skull. And this is 1 month post-op. What you're seeing is that pterygoid plate, which has been devoid of the disease, but still lying over there healthily. And amount of granulation and post-operative construction is all going well. And you can see some undercuts also over there. So if this is the surgical protocol of debridement, now how to maintain this particular open cavity for her to really run her life for this last 9 months. I'll just come to the thing in the next slide. This is how we manage the open wounds intraoperatively to control the hemorrhage, as well as to have pressure dressings. What we do is we prepare a pre-operative splint. Later on, once the debridement is completed, we have a material called as pinnacle. This is a material which gets like in, like in, so it becomes softer when you place it in the hot water. So we mold it to the defect, place it over there with the dressings, and then we do the closure of the surgical wound. Later on, maybe after 2-3 days, we remove that fragilely. Once we remove that, we do the secondary debridements, that is maybe any slough present over there, the nasal secretions, and any other debris or the new fungi colony been seen is properly debrided then and there. Once that is done, then we give this feeding strand before we try to remove the nasogastric tube. The feeds are still with NG tubes. So before you remove the NG tube, you have to make sure that there is no food material or other secretions been settled over there on your surgical wound. Hence, what we prepare is with a soft liner inside and the tray, and is fixed with 2 screws that are called as intermaxillary screws, We just fix them off over there so that the patient cannot remove, because the patient is sent home, should be coming back once in a week. We try to remove that and see any other secretions or any other infections developing, if at all, then we have to remove this and then again do the debridement. Now, once that is done, the feeding is done, patient is comfortable, no reservations, and she's comfortable taking all the food materials, then we give her a maintenance splint. This is the maintenance splint what we prepare with the help of our prosthodontist. Now, this is a two-piece stunt. The white part is the one which goes into the defect. If you can see, there are so many folds, and it looks like a mold, like it is retained in the cavity with the help of primary and secondary uh, stability areas. That is, the undercuts, what we call them as an undercut. You have to be very fragile when you are placing it. So this is placed in, and it has a magnet. It has a part of implant within it. So this is first placed, which is placed by the surgeon or the doctor, and then the plate is a separate entity which has been given, where the patient has been trained to use it by himself. He can remove the tray, clean it, gargle that area, and put it back. He need not remove the inner part. Inner part is removed, checked for the disease, checked for the healing, and any other findings would like to see is all checked then and there. And that is the thing which we give post-operatively till we plan for reconstruction to give near normal function for the patient. That is her dentition. That thing, I'll come with another case. That case is a recent case which me, my colleague, and another student of mine have done that. No, coming, that is how we do debridement. Debridement is the solution for the disease, and don't leave any part of it, even the normal tissue, as Dr. Sudhakar sir has said, that we may have to excise the normal tissue also, but access and other things sometimes deny you, but still you have to go in microscopically to finish off the case. So coming to the reconstruction, as sir said, yes, we need to use regional flaps or distant flaps, microvascular flaps. I have a question on that. And the best method, or presently, if there is no skin involvement, the implants are playing good role. As sir said, in the excisions of the orbit, the orbital processes play a very good role, and maxillary processes with the help of implants, which I will be showing you in the next slides. So this is a case of regional flap. Dr. Yesuratnam, sorry, is assistant professor, associate professor. Is not a professor in head. I'm really sorry for typing that. This is the pre-operative case done at their place. You can see the reconstructed CT of the maxilla there, involving maxilla and the nasal part. After debridement, you can see the necrotic bone over there. Then the tissue, this tissue is none other than the temporalis muscle. The temporalis muscle has been taken as a graft, local graft, that means the transport regional graft. Once your graft has been taken, it is brought underneath the zygomatic arch into the defect area, sutured to the defect area to fill the soft tissue. This can be done in mild cases, one. Number two, where the amount of deformity is less. So this is a post-operative picture of his, and this is one method of reconstructing the local area with the regional flaps. Now this is a case of total maxillectomy, where it took us around 9 months to finish this case. So this is a case which has again come in the first stage of COVID-19, long back. Yes, all the patients we have treated, around 4, 5, I think it's 5 we have done till today. It's all with the history of diabetes. This is total maxillectomy case. You can see the necrotic bone, loss of tissue, changes in the contour, and all these things with mobile teeth which have been extracted. All the signs are present over here. So once the surgery is done, this is the healing period. You can see the sloughing and other things around the tissues. Yes, this is what happens if you don't give the plating and other things. So later on, we thought that yes, we have to give some supportive plating system. That's why recently we started off with the thing what I've shown you about the intermediate plates and the feeding plates. Once the healing has been after 8 months, this case has been taken up for the reconstruction, and these are our implants with the framework, and this is a denture which has been delivered. I'll come back in the next slide. Now you can appreciate what has been done. Total maxillectomy is done. Utilize the left of pterygoids on either side, 2 pterygoid implants. Utilize the zygomatic bone with the zygomatic implant. Utilize the left of nasal bones with the nasal implant, lateral nasal implants. This has been bridged out to give her a denture like this. This is what she was before, and this is what she is after. Now she can have a normal routine food without any hesitation. Microvascular flaps, as I said, is a big questionable point right now because when you have to do a microvascular, it has to be anastomized within a local vessel. That most of it would be the maxillary vessel. So necrosis of the vessel itself is a questionable part, whether we can go for it or not. So we need to check out in future what would be the best supportive microvascular reconstructive options in these patients with MUCAR. Only surgery is not the answer. It has to be given with the supportive management. Supportive management, sir, has already given in brief that amphotericin and poconozoles are doing good job right now. So let us hope we'll control the disease at the earliest, bring down the number. I would thank the organizers, and I would say that national and state associations of OMSI is ready to extend their hands to combat this situation to provide near normal aesthetics and functions for the needy. Thank you very much, sir.
Unmute. Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Ravi Shekhar, for touching upon the prosthetics and the reconstructive aspects. Not too much going on to the basics that I have already covered. It's so nice of you for restricting to your time and as well as to talking of the reconstruction as well as the particularly the prosthetics that we have brought in. So we'll come back to your questions also towards the end. And are you there, Dr. Swati? Okay, you can unshare your screen, Dr. Ravi Shekhar.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, good evening, everyone.
Yeah. Please stay on, Dr.
Just a minute.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Now you can share your screen, Dr. Swati. As you start sharing your screen, I wish to introduce Dr. Swati P. Alok, and she is an associate professor of ophthalmology at All India Institute of Medical Sciences. She had her MBBS education from Raipur, Chhattisgarh, and she did her MD in ophthalmology from All India Institute of Medical Sciences. Her areas of interest are orbital inflammatory diseases. That's the reason why she is here today. And she is a very accomplished ophthalmic surgeon as well as a prolific writer as well. So she has 60 peer-reviewed publications to her credit as well as 25 chapters in various textbooks. So I'm very glad to have Dr. Swati P. Alok on our panel today, and I would request her to proceed with her presentation followed by discussion. Dr. Swati, please. You can put your slideshow on.
My slides are visible, sir?
Yeah, it's visible. You can be a little louder.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank you and Dr. Vinod for having me here. And yes, my area of interest is definitely orbital inflammatory diseases and also neuro-ophthalmology. That is the reason why, because two are very closely associated with each other, and that's the reason why, I have so much amount of interest in orbit diseases. So to begin with, as Dr. Sudhakar has, in very detail explained what is the mucor and how it progresses, what is the pathogenesis. So I'm not going to get into the details of it. So, as Sir has already explained that why we have this increased incidence of mucormycosis in presence of COVID, it's not just the overuse of steroids, but it's also because of multiple other factors. Probably the virus itself causes an immunocompromised state, and that is the reason why many of patients land up with mucormycosis. So, as he has also explained the anatomy of orbit very extensively, I will just want to highlight one or two points that when it comes to the anatomy of orbit, we also need to remember that all the extraocular muscles are they converge at the level of orbital apex, which is a very, very important structure from the surgical point of view, as well as from the neurosurgery or the involvement of brain point of view, because from this is the area from where it spreads to the cavernous sinus, and then it spreads into the intracranial cavity. So it is very closely related to cavernous sinus here, and that's what we have to keep in mind, that once there is an orbital apex involvement, the chances of intracranial involvement are very, very high, which is a very high risk factor for the mortality. Then what are the clinical features of orbital involvement? So the first and the most common symptom is facial pain, periorbital pain. Then there is conjunctival chemosis, congestion, and blurred vision. There can be swelling of eyes. And the another important symptom which patients usually complain is diplopia. That is because of the involvement of extraocular muscles, which leads to the limitation of movement and hence diplopia. There can be lateral displacement of the globe depending on the site of the involvement. There can be proptosis, but all these are late signs. When the orbital apex is involved, the globe is completely frozen. That means it cannot move there. There's a lot of proptosis. The globe comes out, tends to come out of the orbit, and there is complete ptosis. At the same time, we should also always look for sensation around the orbit as well as corneal sensation, because this is the sign of the orbital apex involvement until we do imaging. So if there is loss of corneal sensation, we are sure that probably the disease has extended to the level of orbital apex, and we should be now considering as a late sign rather than a early sign. Other manifestation of the eye includes central retinal artery occlusion, as we all know that this fungus spreads through blood or is an angioinvasive fungus. So central retinal artery occlusion is also very commonly seen, followed by, because optic nerve involvement is also there because of the surrounding inflammation, we may have the pupillary involvement, which may be seen in form of relative afferent pupillary defect. So these two manifestations are very late kind of manifestations, and it can be seen only if the entire orbit is involved. The earliest sign or the earliest symptom of the rhinoorbital cerebral mucormycosis is the congestion and stuffiness of the nose, and that's the question we should always ask patient directly. If there are any such symptom or sign present, patient should be referred to ENT consultation immediately. On examination, there are certain points which I would like to highlight. So from the ophthalmic point of view, because these are generally things which are neglected when it comes to a comprehensive management. So always check for conjunctival chemosis and congestion. Then always look for proptosis from worm's eye point of view. Why? Because subtle proptosis can be missed on the frontal examination. So either you have to look from below or you have to look from above. Either it has to be a worm's eye view or a bird's eye view to examine for the proptosis. Then this video is to show the retropulsion test, how we do it, which is very, very confirmatory of the any kind of lesion. It's not specific for mucormycosis, but any space occupying lesion inside the orbit. Now, if you see this video, you will see that when we are pressing the right eye of the patient, the globe is not getting compressed inside the orbit, while on the compression of the left eye, the globe is very well can be compressed inside the orbit. So this is the right eye compression, and this is the left thigh compression. So this test is very, very sensitive test for any kind of space occupying lesion inside the orbit and can be done bedside even with unconscious patients. So it has to be done regularly in high risk patients to know whether the orbital involvement is there or not. Then you should also examine for ocular movements, as you can see in this case. So you have to examine movements in all gazes, and in this particular case, we can see that the movements were limited in lateral gaze as well as in up gaze. So this is also a sign of orbital involvement, and when this kind of sign is present, we should always suspect mucormycosis, especially in setting of high-risk patients. Then this is the kind of late stage which has been discussed previously also, that there will be a unilateral facial swelling on the affected side, and it's kind of advanced by the time the patient present to us with this kind of picture. It's already almost a lost case. So coming to the management, or before we move to the management, the orbital disease can be segregated as a mild or limited orbital disease or a moderate and severe orbital disease. So if our retropulsion test is negative, that means that we are able to push the globe inside the orbit, and if the extraocular movements are normal, it is suggestive of very mild or a limited orbital disease. That means we can still preserve the globe, and even maybe the vision may be preserved. But if the retropulsion test is positive or any of the ocular movement is limited, that means the disease is already in advanced stage, irrespective of the visual loss. So investigation, as Dr. Sudhakar has already spoken about them, about tissue biopsy, about culture, about imaging. I'm not going to get into the detail of all that. This picture is just to show how the orbital involvement is there, because this fungus spreads from the ethmoid sinus into the orbit. So the medial side is the most commonly involved side, and therefore there's a lot of inflammation here. Similarly, you can see in this picture also, there's a lot of inflammation on the medial side of the right eye. So that has to be understood when we come to the imaging of the orbit. But also we need to keep in mind that you have to always look for the involvement of orbital apex as well as cavernous sinus. If this kind of thing is there, if the orbital apex is involved, that means the disease is already in advanced stage, and we may probably have to proceed with exentration. To look for the bony destruction, the CT scan is better alternative than the MRI. So this Dr. Sudhakar has already covered, so I'm not going to again get into detail of the histopath of and the diagnosis of mucor. Coming to the management, as it has been emphasized over and over again, that has to be a multidisciplinary approach. We need intravenous amphotericin B, but at the same time, we also need surgical debridement of the sinus, facial debridement if it is involved, and exentration if the orbit is involved. So this is again about the amphotericin B, its dose, and posaconazole followed by posaconazole. So let's not get into it. So if it's a mild orbital disease, so we need to plan only the sinus surgery with the close monitoring of orbital disease. So what we need to monitor and follow up is, number one, the ocular movement and retropulsion test. If any of these are positive, then it is advisable to proceed for exentration rather than doing a conservative management. There are reports of use of retrovulvar injections, amphotericin B, but these are just an adjuvant therapy. It is not a primary line of treatment. So if we are waiting for the diagnosis, or in case we have done the sinus surgery and there is limited orbital involvement, you are waiting for the prognosis or the progress of disease. In that cases, we can give the retrovulvar injection of amphotericin B, but it is not the primary treatment. I would like to emphasize this again and again. And the movement we have, and the moment we have the involvement of extraocular muscle, or the retropulsion test is positive, you should always think of exentration. So the final management, or the is the surgical debridement of the infected tissue, and as it has been emphasized, should be done as early as possible. The two major indications are restriction of ocular movements and positive retropulsions test, along with the orbital involvement on imaging. So all these conditions has to be taken care of before we plan for exenteration. So this is just a clinical picture of a patient who had the extensive orbital involvement. You can see that there was a lot of chemosis, congestion, peri-orbital swelling. The lids were swollen. The patient had limited ocular movements in all the direction, and imaging also showed the extensive sinus involvement as well as orbit involvement. Then this is another case, a clinical picture of a 14-year-old male patient with right eye complete orbital involvement, including the ptosis. And this was his imaging, where you can see there was extensive involvement inside the orbit as well as in sinuses. And this is a post-op picture after the maxillectomy with orbital exenteration. Similarly, another case of orbital involvement where there was pansinusitis and orbital involvement together. So what is the preoperative preparation for exenteration, which is the definitive surgical management for such cases? Number one, it has to be looked from the doctor's point of view as well as patient point of view. So from doctor point of view, it's important to be very, very sure about diagnosis, because it's an extensive surgery and a mutilating surgery. So before we remove the entire orbit and give a permanent morbidity to the patient, we have to be very, very sure about our diagnosis. It needs to be discussed and consulted with the microbiologist, radiologist, and ENT surgeon. Send consultation to other specialty surgeons. Also, a detailed pre-anesthesia checkup and ICU backup is necessary, because it's an extensively mutilating surgery, and it may not be, one may not be able to do it as a stand-alone ophthalmology practice. Secondly, the counseling of patient is very, very important. You have to explain patient that that exenteration is needed as a life-saving procedure. Therefore, a well-informed special consent for it has to be taken. The procedure has to be explained in detail, and you also have to explain how to take care of the orbital cavity after exenteration. Also explain that prosthesis may be given later on after some time. This may reduce patient's anxiety to certain extent, although it may not be uh, I should say it may not be completely convincing for the patient, but yes, to certain extent, it helps them to understand that the cosmetic disfigurement can be taken care of. And you also need to explain the need for the further treatment with the oral posaconazole for almost about 3 to 6 months, depending on the extensiveness of the disease. Then this is just photographs to show the various steps of the exenteration procedure. I would also be showing the video. So we give the skin incision, raise the periosteal flap, and remove the entire content of the orbit, including the muscle, the orbital fat, and lid. So this video is to show the exenteration surgery. So you give the incision around the lid, on the lid, superior and inferior. The section is done. Plane is created. So the periosteal incision is now given. Periosteal flap is raised all around. I'm thankful for my oculoplastic colleague for this video. They are the ones who are doing it regularly. So you have to make sure that the periosteal flap is raised properly. And then once The entire plane of dissection is created. You just cut the optic nerve and the muscles and take out the entire orbital content, including lids. So the prosthetic rehabilitation can be done later on, almost after 6 months or so. And these are the spectacle mounted prosthetics that are available. So patient can at least have some kind of cosmetic satisfaction with these kind of implants. Now we have formed certain guidelines for the early identification of these patients and prevention of the orbital mucormycosis, because I think that should be the focus rather than, going up to the level of exenteration. So the idea is to identify patients who are at high risk, which includes uncontrolled diabetes, any patients who are receiving immunosuppressant drugs, anti-cancer drugs, receiving high dose of steroids, history of severe COVID, use of oxygen, or newly detected diabetes. Now, what we do generally at the time of admission, these patients undergo complete ophthalmic examination at the time of admission, and then they undergo weekly examination till the discharge. Now, after discharge, depending on the condition, the patient is asked to seek a follow-up after 2 weeks till 6 weeks, or he can also seek a telephonic consultation if he cannot come, for every 2 weeks till 6 weeks, and then monthly till 3 months from the date of discharge. So what ophthalmic examination we have to do on every visit is: number one, vision assessment. Then the torchlight examination for facial asymmetry, periorbital swelling, presence of proptosis by worm's eye view, retropulsion test, presence of ptosis, presence of any lag of ophthalmos, presence of limitation of ocular movement, any conjunctival chemosis or congestion, involvement of cornea or anterior segment. Always check for pupil reaction and fundus examination. So the idea is to prevent the early disease. Now, the moment we get any of these things positive, it is very, very important to refer patient for an ENT examination, so that any chance of early disease can be picked up. So this is the advice we generally give to the patient: to look for any black discharge, to look for nasal stuffiness from the nose, uh, to uh, co- to report headache or eye pain, to look for any swelling, facial numbness or tingling sensation. Also ask them about any difficulty in chewing or opening the mouth. Also ask them to do a self-examination of face in a daylight to look for facial swelling or blackish discoloration, loosening of teeth, any kind of black areas inside the mouth. And also ask them for an immediate consultation with the ENT surgeon. At the same time, at the time of discharge, the regular treatment and follow-up is advised. That's the practice we follow at our center for all kind of COVID patients, especially with the high-risk patients. So I would like to conclude that it's a multidisciplinary approach with the help of ENT surgeon, neurosurgeon, maxillofacial surgeon, ophthalmologist, radiologist, and physicians. Prevention and early detection is the key if we don't want our patients to lose their eye and have this kind of morbidity for their life. Thank you.
Namande, unmute. Thank you very much, Dr. Swati, for very elaborate exposition of the ophthalmologist viewpoint. And can you unshare your screen?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do, sir. Just a second. I think there's something. Yeah.
You can do stop sharing there. Yeah. 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 Thank you. Particularly, I have to appreciate you for your video demonstration of your retropulsion, as well as the video demonstration of the exenteration of the orbit. And thank you very much. And also, you have aptly covered the prosthetic rehabilitation of post-exenteration defects. And as you all know, that the post-orbital exenteration defects is an issue that need to be that need to be addressed both by a plastic surgeon as well as an ocular surgeon. And like Ravi Shekhar told us earlier, temporalis flap is very handy whenever you have to cover that particular defect, whenever you want to fill in the defect in order the prosthesis to fit in properly. I'll take up these questions in the chat box one by one. There are very few questions in the chat box. More and more people have started marking their identity or marking their attendance in the chat box. Please do not do that and leave the chat box for the sake of questions. And there was a question from Youngstar Yasin. That was the first one that I have received today, and they said that the medium of instruction should be in Telugu so that everybody understands. But please do understand that our medium of instruction in medical school here is English, and we all are well versed with this, and we study in English and we express in English. And if you have any doubt, you can always ask in Telugu, so can we always we can answer in Telugu if there is any problem with understanding in English. There is no problem in expressing in Telugu, but there are people who are come from the outside the state as well who are listening to this, and it's better that we all speak the common language. If you have any doubts, if you think that you'll be more comfortable in Telugu, you can always ask the questions in Telugu so that we will answer in Telugu only. That's about the first question. And Hussein Sheikh has made a mention of he has felt that the presentation is something like a teaching to the postgraduates. So he says that we are more interested in signs and symptoms of the disease and how to treat these patients at the PHC level. Please do understand that we have a variety of audience here, starting from the MBBS doctors to the super specialists. So we have to cater to the needs of everybody. But you must have noticed from what I said about the signs and symptoms and what Dr. Swati has told you as to what needs to be kept in your mind, how to examine what are the signs and symptoms. By this you must have come to an understanding that how to identify these cases early, how to examine them. Dr. Swati even went to the extent of demonstrating it through a video. So please make use of all this and try to diagnose early. At your level, it's very important to diagnose early and send these patients at the earliest to the departments like the King George Hospital or the Guntur Medical College Hospital or the Rangaraya Medical College Government General Hospital, so on and so forth, where the treatment for the mucormycosis is available. So for you, you have to understand that well, to examine the patient and refer early, number one. Number two, to take care of these patients post-operative after they return from the hospital. Like we have told you that the posaconazole or the isavuconazole has to be used for prolonged periods of the time. You have to see and motivate the patients to use them for the prolonged periods of the time. And also Dr. Swati has told you as to what are the post-operative advices that need to be given to the patient. You have to give such an advice to you must have made a note of that. You have to give such an advice to the patient and come back to you once if they suffer from any of the symptoms or the signs of recurrence or the leftover infection, so on and so forth. So identifying early, following the patients, motivating the patient, post-operative care in the form of motivating them to take the drugs is most important. Dr. Hussein Sheikh. Dr. Anjali Reddy has asked a question as to how many males and females. Like we have seen, there is a male preponderance even earlier also in worldwide statistics, and similarly we also have a male preponderance in our own series as well, and it's the same. It's almost like 7:3 in the patients which we have operated, and in the rest of the patients who are getting treated in King George Hospital, which are close to 100, we have the same male preponderance to the tune of 1/3 to 2/3 female to male. So that's a question, the reply to the Anjali Reddy. Anjali Reddy also has raised a question, who am I? He was questioning who am I, and some of the persons have already given, our friends have already given a reply to her in the chat box to understand who am I. And this is about the various questions. And I have a question to Dr. Swati. Is there any role of retrobulbar antifungal injection in these patients? If so, at what level do we have to give, and how to give that? Dr. Swati, please.
So as I said during my presentation that it has very limited role. Although there are one or two studies, but has no clinically proven role till now, and role is limited to the cases where orbital involvement is very very minimal. So if the movements are ocular movements are normal, or if the retropulsion test is negative, and you have done the sinus surgery and you just want to know what is the response, then you can give patients these retroorbital injections of amphotericin and just wait to see whether how the disease is progressing. So if there is no worsening, then maybe we can continue giving these injections, and they have to be given over a period of 2 weeks daily. So if we continue giving these injections, if there's no worsening, maybe we are safe. But in case there is a worsening in form of either limitation of ocular movement or positive retropulsion test, in that case, it is important that we do exenteration.
No. Thank you. And Dr. Satyabhushan has a question in the form of in the resource constraint situations like what we are going through now, where the drugs are not available to the extent they should be, what should we be doing? Yeah, this is a very, very important question that we have been discussing day in and day out, and particularly with the authorities as well. And there is in the situation wherein we are present at present, we are giving all the injectables to the patients who are requiring surgery. For those who do not require surgery, who are early in the treatment, though it is ideal to give the amphotericin, we are trying to give them the posaconazole tablets, which are available with us in quite plenty. So if those patients who are progressing, where the disease is progressing despite taking these tablets, we are converting them onto the injections, the posaconazole injections, and taking them up for surgery. So we'll have to balance between the availability of the drugs as well as the resources that are available to us and the type of patients that we have. The other chat. Let me go through the other chat questions. Yeah, can you answer that question, Swati, of the one from Praveen Kumar? He says that I have 3 cases of involvement of unilateral eye amongst the COVID patients within 1 week of admission, which are suggestive of mucormycosis, but couldn't be diagnosed at peripheral level. What do you say about that?
First of all, it's important to get an ENT consultation in these cases. They are the ones who are primarily going to take biopsy, because it is difficult to take any kind of orbital biopsy. So an ENT biopsy from the nose is very, very important, and get them to a KOH mount, which is not a very difficult thing to procure. And if it is a biopsy proven mucormycosis, then the next step is definitely sinus debridement and orbital debridement, depending on the extent of the disease.
Yeah. There was a question on the nitrous oxide. I think it is nitric oxide rather than nitrous oxide. The day before, actually, we have discussed about this, but there is no role of nitric oxide in this particular disease now. Though there was isolated cases of being used in the other fungal infections, but not in the mucormycosis. Is there any role of anti-inflammatory drugs like Chimerol in the pre or the post-operative period? Is a question by Dr. Vijay Shekhar. You have any idea of that? Dr. Ravi Shekhar, can you answer that?
Hello. Sir, can you please come back?
Yeah. The question is there any role of Chimerol fort? Chimerol is used.
It's an enzyme basically, but definitely post-operative swellings and other things we can control. But what usually we do is I've shown you that intraoperative stunt with a pressure pack, which is much better, because it's always a controversial statement saying that Kemerol has some role, but maybe minimal, but it need not be 100% given to the patients. You can utilize the pressure packs to control the local swellings. It's only 48 hours what we have to manage it.
Yeah. Preoperatively, definitely there is no role, I can understand. The postoperatively also, like Dr. Ravi Shekhar says, these enzymes hardly work, even not only in the eye, but eye and the face
Maxillofacial.
and the other areas as well. And the another question is the if the KOH staining is negative, but there is a strong suspicion, should we go for the biopsy? Yes, absolutely. And the biopsy is the clinching. KOH staining may not be positive always. Even if KOH staining is positive, for a clinic for a definitive diagnosis, it's the biopsy which clinches the diagnosis, and we all should go for that. And Swati, there is one more question to you from Roja Ramani, who asks you a question on because this being a fungal disease, what is the ideal time for implant? Can you answer the ideal time for implant post excenteration?
That depends, sir, on the amount of inflammation. I think the time when the inflammation settles down completely. I think that's the ideal time. Generally, it takes more than 6 months, around 1 year for the prosthetic implant.
Yeah, actually, the rule of thumb in any of the reconstructive procedures, after any of the reconstructive procedures, the time for implantation, use of these implants are 6 months. Normally, after the healing of the wound, normally we assume that there will be some amount of the fibrosis and tissue modulation that takes place inside, remodeling of the tissues, what we call, takes place for about 6 months. So we consider putting these implants so that you don't need to change them quite often at the end of 6 months after the healing of these wounds microscopically. Outward, if they are healed, wait for 6 months and try to provide them this. This is the rule of the thumb that is followed in most of the reconstructive surgeries. Just one more question. Isolated ocular, what is the management strategy? Isolated ocular mucormycosis, what is the management strategy is the question. Swati, can you take that?
Generally, mucormycosis as an isolated orbital disease is rarely seen. Usually, it is the sinus through which it spreads into the orbit.
Yeah.
So, even if it is an isolated presentation, you will have to go through sinus approach.
Okay, thank you. And there was a question by Kiran who says that in teleconsultation he found a case similar to what we have described so far. And my answer to Kiran is that you immediately send him to the King George Hospital so that we will examine him in detail and find out whether it is a mucormycosis. Whenever you have such patients on teleconsultation, please advise them to come to the hospital and get themselves examined. Here Prabhakar asked a question that if the patient has this mucor during the treatment of the COVID, do we have to concentrate more on COVID or on the mucor? I think both of them have to be done simultaneously. That needs to be understood. And the moment you diagnose this or confirm this, you'll have to start on the antifungals and undertake the surgery also, even if they are COVID positive, because you are undertaking surgeries when the COVID positive patients with the due precautions. Yeah, there's a question from Sai Santosh. Swati, it's for you. And they say that when can we decide to do an orbital excentration, or is there any thin line where we can save the vision of the patient in the mild orbital involvement?
First of all, I'd like to make clear that vision is not the criteria on which we decide whether we want to exentrate or not. It is the actually involvement of the extension of the extensive involvement of the orbit. So if you have extensive involvement, that means more than medial wall is involved or the medial side of the orbit is involved. If the lesion is extending up to the orbital apex, if your ocular movements are limited, if you have frozen globe, in that case, irrespective of the vision, we may have to proceed with exenteration.
Yeah, so this has to be understood very clearly because the way she is reiterated, it is the objective evidence of having mucor, particularly the apical disease, it decides. And it has been said in the COVID instant order that has been given to us that involvement of the three extraocular muscles basically tells us the reason why we should go for an orbital exentration. So there was one more question by Kshetra, and she says, when are these patients getting mucor infection after the COVID? But there is no hard and fast rule about this. And there are some patients most of the patients are coming about 3 or 4 weeks after they are positive for the COVID-19. But we have seen patients who are still suffering from COVID-19 and having this particular disease. So there is no hard and fast rule there, but most of them are post-COVID. But there is no rule to tell you that it cannot affect those people who are already suffering from COVID-19. And there is a question that how to differentiate orbital cellulitis from ocular mucormycosis clinically is a question. Swati, can you take that?
Generally, orbital cellulitis, which is mainly a bacterial disease, is much more fulminant. So it progresses quite rapidly, and there is a lot of discharge, chemosis, abscess formation in that condition, while fungal infections are generally silent.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a few other questions. Can I know the black fungus related symptoms mainly in the eyes? So this has already been dealt with very extensively. I think Salman was not there when you have presented. Samira says, when can we suspect mucormycosis in non-COVID? It's the same again. It can happen even in the non-COVID, particularly if they are diabetics and not under control, and if they are on the drugs which are immunocompromising, or if they are in the conditions which are immunocompromised, if they are immunocompromised. In all these patients, if you have the signs and symptoms that we have already narrated, you should suspect the mucormycosis. Is there any prophylactic antifungal drug for those involved in treating the COVID patients? So he says that the healthcare workers, should they have the prophylactic antifungal? There is nothing like that. And please do understand that this is not a contagious disease because you all have sports all the time. Don't think that you got the mucormycosis. You will get the mucormycosis from the patient. On starting the antifungal injections for sinus mucor, which is the ideal day of surgery, any guidelines at the earliest? Can you please answer, sir, Dr. Sirisha? Sirisha, please understand that the antifungals are to be started the moment you diagnose the condition, even if it is clinically. So please understand that it has to be started as soon as possible. It has no relation to the surgery. It has to be continued even after the surgery also. And also, there is a suggestion by Vijay Shekhar, who says that we have to better advise the patients of the warning symptoms of the mucor at the time of the discharge from the COVID ward. It's a good suggestion that the doctors who are discharging these patients from the COVID wards should make the patients understand that they should come back if there is a swelling. If there is a swelling or if they have pain and anesthesia, the numbness in one side of the face, so they should immediately come back and report. It's a good suggestion. From Telangana state, Hyderabad, can I clarify black fungus will start from the eyes or lungs? It starts from the nose. If there are no questions, thank you very much, Dr. Ravi Shekhar, and also Dr. Swati for excellently presenting your point as well as answering all the questions. And this is the type of the webinar we are always looking forward to. And as you have seen that more than 350 participants were there on this forum. And thank you very much, Dr. Swati and Dr. Ravi Shekhar. With that note, I thank Dr. Vinod Kumar IAS for allowing us to conduct this particular program today, and I look forward for the similar programs in future also. And I request all of those who have logged in today to log in again and keep abreast with what is happening in this world, and also translate whatever you have learned today into practice. That's what is the idea of the state government in empowering the knowledge, empowering all the doctors with the knowledge. And this is the flagship program of the government of Andhra Pradesh in capacity building. So by thanking you all once again, I end the session here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for the opportunity.